Welcome to Redefining Medicine, an intimate and personalized program that illustrates a different side of the practice of medicine. Our in-depth conversations will focus on mentors and motivators who are consistently reshaping, redefining, and rediscovering the field of medical healthcare. I would like to welcome Dr. David Ludwig, a nationally renowned endocrinologist and professor at Harvard Medical School, in addition to a clinical expert on obesity, described by Time magazine as the obesity warrior, and author of the best-selling book, Always Hungry. We are thrilled to also have the opportunity to welcome his collaborator and partner in life, his wife, Dawn Ludwig. Okay, so let's talk about you, Dr. Ludwig. What initially motivated you to go into medicine? Did you always know as a child you wanted to be a doctor?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I really felt a calling to medicine from very early in life. When I was in fourth grade, I remember coming home walking home from school past our local small branch library, and I'd stop in and gravitate to the books on physiology and anatomy, how the body worked, or other science sections, but mainly it was physiology, the organs, the heart, the lungs, how blood was pumped around in the four chambers of the heart, different functioning of the body. And there was I remember this little shelf on physiology books for, I guess it's for anybody. I read through them, and I went up to the librarian, and I said, "Can you order some more?" And she was shocked, and I didn't think that was like anything unusual.
Well, she was used to getting the Hardy Boys request, I guess. But.
I guess might have been. Yeah, I'm not sure what was popular back then, but I realized that was probably, exceptional. That for some reason, I was pulled into a fascination with biology at an early age. I don't think that necessarily needs to be exceptional. That when people, and I use this approach with my patients, and in my book, both my books, I make a point of explaining the fascinating workings of the body to help people become inspired, to realize how extraordinary the body is when it's working properly and what leads it to go wrong. But that with the right exposure, with science in general and the body in particular, is just a topic of incredible fascination. And so that emerged early in my life and has been a major guiding vision, even though my career twisted and turned along the way. But I kept coming back to that fascination, which was present even before I was 10 years old.
Incredible. Were there any medical practitioner influences in your life?
I was the first doctor in the family. My parents were very interested in politics and civil rights, anti-war movement, anti-Vietnam War, environmental concerns, but very politically focused. And so it seemed as if I was the first person in the family who had really left that focus on politics. But it turns out that food is about as political as anything else. The food industry is $1 trillion a year business, just in the United States. Tremendous political implications of policy decisions. The food industry, of course, lobbies, spends tens of millions of dollars a year lobbying Congress for policies that favor them, but sometimes at a vastly greater cost to public health. And
what initially sparked your interest to study endocrinology and then go into nutrition?
Well, for endocrinology, I also felt called to that because, to me, that's the system that ties the whole body together. So endocrinology is hormones, and hormones by their nature are potent signals from one part of the body to other parts of the body that maintain the sophisticated communication necessary to keep our bodies functioning optimally. Whether we're, as a woman, adapting to pregnancy, breastfeeding, or for anybody adapting to times of illness or health, taking advantage of times of feast when there'd be lots of resources around and we'd want to grow, and or other times of starvation when the body needs to be efficient. So hormones integrate that whole process. And in fact, most drugs that we use for chronic disease, ranging from diabetes, heart disease, neurological diseases, many of these drugs take advantage of biological pathways that were there to mediate hormonal action. That raises a fascinating possibility that we can truly use food as medicine in a more fundamental way than is sometimes appreciated. Because every time we eat, our hormones change in potentially dramatically different ways. Not just how much we eat, but the types of foods we eat, be they fast or slow-acting carbohydrates, fats, proteins, the polyphenols and fiber that affect our microbiome. All of these alter hormones, and those hormones in turn influence the expression of genes throughout the body.
Was there an aha moment that you had this epiphany that I needed to study this, I needed to research this, and deliver the message to the public and to my peers about the groundbreaking research that you did?
I think there were many key moments. For me, and one way that I have experienced that in my career is finding a path that was very productive and interesting, calling me. And oftentimes, I would discover that as just a great excitement for this new area, this new decision, whether it was a field of pediatrics to specialize in, or endocrinology, or then
And why did you choose pediatrics and pediatric endocrinology?
Yeah, I was just going to say that oftentimes I would find some, this passion to proceed along a certain area, and then suddenly run into what felt like a brick wall. Like I couldn't find any reason to proceed, that I was getting frustrated. I wasn't seeing a vision beyond that. For example, I initially entered medical school thinking I would be going into internal medicine. Internal medicine was where all the hotshots went, and it seemed like the most interesting research was taking place in internal medicine. Pediatrics was kind of like ear infections and
runny noses,
vaccinations.
Right.
Yeah, and I loved kids, but I never really seriously considered it. And then as I came to understand the reality of internal medicine, at least as practiced in hospitals, it became very depressing for me, because so much of internal medicine, not as it should be, but as it is trying to prolong life at the end of life, after years of chronic disease has taken their toll, and we're trying to manipulate drugs, sometimes surgeries, just to get a little long. And I felt that was not a compelling interest of mine.
Did you think about quitting?
To fighting nature. And so I kind of got depressed. Mm-hmm. And then I woke up one day with this understanding, with almost like a revelation. It felt like pediatrics, because I'd always been interested. I always loved children. I always played well with them. They always responded to me. I can be a pretty good clown underneath my serious Harvard exterior. And then I realized that I jumped to conclusions that weren't true, that one can have a very rigorous career in research. And in fact, in pediatrics, you're working with, not against, nature. A child can suffer from a life-threatening condition, but if you can get through that, that child has tremendous recuperative possibilities. So that was really where I wanted to focus my life. And then I had the same experience. I was heading into infectious diseases, which is where I did my PhD research. But infectious diseases in the hospital, again, is chasing resistant infections in people who have these serious debilitating diseases. AIDS was also emerging, and I just was not seeing a purpose there for me. Not that that's not incredibly important work, but I was not seeing any passion. And that's when, again, I just literally woke up with a sense of endocrinology, and then that has been proven to be a great vehicle. And then the third revelation was when I was in the laboratory doing basic research, experimental animals on obesity, trying to understand the genes affecting body weight. And it was fascinating work, and that seemed to be where all of the most important work was happening in obesity, in the laboratory, gene jocks and the like.
Why hyper-focus at that time on obesity?
I had gotten, I'd always been interested in food, and obesity was really in the epidemic was just in its most rapid stage of unfolding in the early to mid-90s, and I could see that this was very relevant to endocrinology, very relevant to public health, and I'd gotten into the laboratory, but then became, again, increasingly depressed that the studies that I was doing with genes and with mice seemed to have little relevance to the care of obesity in the clinic. How did discovering another gene affect this child, who was struggling with obesity? Our genes haven't changed in a way that would explain the obesity epidemic. And so that was my last big shift, that I remember coming across some research that opened my mind to using food in a different way, especially work around glycemic index. That was a key shift place.
That research has laid the groundwork for every other diet over the last decade.
Well, maybe not every other diet, but I think certainly we can debate the relevance of paying attention to glycemic index numbers. I actually don't think most people need to, and I don't even frequently use the concept glycemic index with patients. But I think it's a very important research tool, and it provides insights into key mechanisms for how our food affects our hormones. So that may be a long answer to your question, but I think that has been the current phase of my career I'm in, and I guess I'll come to some new time of getting depressed and dispirited.
Oh, goodness, no.
And maybe that will lead me to something even better.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so here's a question for you. If you weren't doing what you're doing, what would you be doing?
Arctic exploring.
Really?
No.
Oh,
just
okay. You haven't figured it out yet, I guess. That
epiphany
hasn't surfaced.
No, there's so many other interesting aspects of life which I realize have to get submerged to some degree to have the kind of career that I've had, with working 50 or 60 hours a week.
And you have a family.
Yeah, I have a family, and I have an 8-year-old son, and
Oh,
so
wow.
I make sure to spend lots of time with him.
Who has never been through a drive-through before.
He is not. No,
Right.
he does not recognize McDonald's as actually human food.
You've done your job.
Yeah, my wife is a gourmet natural food chef, so we had a pretty optimal home environment. But he loves sardines. Kimchi. Kimchi, which is this pickled, fermented Korean thing that they like.
Prebiotic.
Great probiotics. He loves kimchi. He would sit down and go through a whole bottle of it if we let him. And so I think it really shows how, yes, children are born with natural response to sweetness, to salt, these primal flavors of breast milk, but they're naturally malleable and can be guided with the right influences to a very healthful diet in most cases. That most cases of food aversion and fussiness, picking, eating can be prevented at the start. I'm not saying necessarily every, people won't have their food sensitivity issues, but and it's never too late. But if you start right from the start, boy, it makes things much easier.
So what's in his snack drawer?
He doesn't have a snack drawer because we just let healthy foods in the house, which includes delicious. So when you're not trying to restrict fat, you can have all sorts of wonderful, luscious foods that don't need to be put into a special drawer that can only be accessed once in a while. So we have dark chocolate almost every night, and we wouldn't restrict that. And he can have as much as, we guide him in reasonable choices, that you wouldn't sit down for breakfast and just eat a chocolate bar as a typical breakfast. So you kind of have to give guidance. But if you've got the healthy foods in the house, typically you don't have to restrict things. And he loves having what Walter Willett at School of Public Health has coined the three delights for dessert, which is nuts, dark chocolate, and fruit. There's actually a fourth delight that we don't actually share with him, which is like a little bit of alcohol, which could be cardioprotective, but he'll wait a few years. But the three delights.
And how do you prevent him from, well, I guess he's well aware of the situation in regard to how he needs to make healthy choices. So when he goes to a friend's home and they don't have healthy choices, does he refrain? Does he? No,
we don't worry about him. It's not like he refuses to have a bite of. He likes pizza, so if he's going to his friend's house, he'll have some pizza. Right. But he'll try to find some protein. He knows, if I'm going to have all the processed carbs, I should get some protein with it to balance it. I think he knows, he's experienced that he feels better. He's very aware of his body. He's very aware of his feelings, and I think that that's the natural human condition. It's when kids are just getting loaded up on sugary beverages, or I should say sugary cereals for breakfast, juice, and all these Cheetos for snacks, that they lose an awareness of how good they could feel with good food. And so, you stop discriminating.
Does he ever question why all of this is out there and even available for human consumption?
We discuss it. Yeah. It's a notion that even relatively young children can get, that all these processed packaged foods. I'll ask a kid in clinic, a 6-year-old, I could say, is this stuff, we talked about healthy food, is this stuff healthy? And they kind of get a sense for real food versus fake food made in factories with lots of artificial ingredients. And I say, well, which do you see advertised more? And they say, I see, the fake foods. Right. Well, why? Do you think that when the people selling those foods, are they interested in your health, or are they interested in making money for themselves? They're interested in making money for themselves. They get that. Kids can understand what manipulation is. And once we immunize them with that knowledge, they can then make wise decisions.
What does functional or integrative or personalized or regenerative medicine mean to you?
What I understand about functional medicine is just good medicine. It's looking at the underlying causes of disease, not aiming to treat isolated symptoms, but causes. And that is what good medicine is about, functional and non-functional. We sometimes forget that in our hyper-specialized, conventional Western medical world, where both different isolated expressions of underlying disease can be the topic. Because, if you're a dermatologist, you see the skin expressions. And, if you're a gastroenterologist, maybe you see what's happening in the liver. A cardiologist sees the cardiovascular complications. But, we're not oftentimes focusing on the root causes relating to diet, chronic inflammation, insulin resistance, including problems with the gut, microbiome, leaky gut syndrome, and how that can affect the brain, as David Perlmutter talked about. And so I think what we're all after is getting closer and closer to the root causes, because then the treatments are more precise, more powerful, and have fewer side effects. Look, we're approaching, I had a commentary in JAMA just this year pointing out that for the first time, essentially since the Civil War, life expectancy has significantly statistically declined last year in 2015. So there are significant increases in death rates for a variety of diseases, and total mortality went up that year. But most notably for diet and obesity-related conditions like diabetes and heart disease. We can only forestall the consequences of a poor diet with drugs, for cholesterol, hypertension, high blood sugar, coagulopathy, with drugs and with surgery. We can only forestall those complications so long. And I think that now it looks like we have to pay the piper. And I anticipate that there may be blips, but that this is the slowing down of a beneficial trend for many years that's been slowing down to a halt, and now we're actually seeing rising mortality, and that's going to increase for years unless we address these root causes of chronic disease. We've got to create a social environment that puts public health ahead of private profit. And that's something that's going to be in everyone's benefit, but it takes political courage, it takes vision, and it's going to take a coordinated society-wide campaign.
So is there anyone that inspires you professionally that you seek mentorship from, perhaps?
That's an interesting question, because so often mentorship is a process that we enjoy and rely upon early in our career. And then when you get to my stage, I'm now mentoring others. So I might mentor people in my laboratory or medical students, or sometimes even high school students will call and ask for some direction. And unfortunately, I don't have time to respond to everyone. Although when I take a young investigator into my laboratory, that's my top priority, is mentoring. But even at my stage, I do rely on others for support, and I think I could use the word mentorship, especially in the work that I'm doing, taking on, not by myself, but with others, an entrenched mindset of the low-fat diet was so aggressively advocated for 40 years that creates a lot of pushback. And things can get personal. Sometimes the attacks can be a little more ad hominem than we like them to be. And it can be sometimes painful to be engaged in these kinds of conflicts. And I personally have to remind myself to avoid responding personally to anything that might
You're not tweeting a comment back.
I'm on social media, and these days to have influence, one does need to be, it is advantageous to be on social media, but it's very easy to get sucked into Twitter wars. And so in terms of my own support, I have close friends and colleagues that I respect, and when something difficult happens, I might, not for the perspective of gossiping, but want to talk to them about what happened, find out their perspective, get their view on what the right course of action is.
Whether to respond?
Sometimes on a specific, sometimes on a specific professional conflict that I might be having with somebody. But typically, what is the right course of action for the greatest good? What I'm about, and the reason I'm working 50 to 60 hours a week, as we talked about earlier, often, is that what personally inspires me is the search for scientific truth. I'm very interested in really how the body works. That was this fascination that I experienced back in the 4th grade. And that purpose is alive, actively alive within me, and motivates my interest, my desire to go to work in the morning, is to design a new study, to explore more deeply the workings of science. And there's a part of it of wanting to find out something that maybe nobody else has thought about. That's That's the nature of investigation, exploration. If you're an explorer in the wilderness, of an unexplored land maybe 500 years ago, there's risks. Maybe you'll get lost, but there's the promise that you'll find something wonderful that nobody's ever seen before. It's hard to find areas in the natural world like that, but there are certainly areas in science that are like that. And so that inspires me personally, and I try to keep my focus as best as possible on discovery and on bringing those discoveries back to serve people, public. I mean, at this moment, in every clinic I see, and at this moment throughout the country, there are people suffering terribly from preventable diet-related diseases. And much of that is due to just misinformation or political compromises that have put special interests ahead of public health. So my inspirations are to make the scientific discoveries and to translate that in a way that will help people, help families, help children. If I can accomplish that, I'm not saying that there's no ego involved. There's certainly excitement about being the first to find something, but the ego alone would not be self-sustaining. It's the deeper purpose of helping that keeps me going.
What was the last book you read that had nothing at all to do with science nutrition, just for fun?
Well, I love reading things that have nothing to do with science or nutrition. And the last one was 7 Eves, which I actually found out because Bill Gates had recommended it in an interview to the New York Times. It was this wonderful, all-consuming, epic science fiction, futuristic book about, based on the premise that something happened to the moon. Probably it was struck by some meteor or something, and the moon broke into 7 pieces, and that at first people were just amazed by that, but over time those pieces started banging into each other because they were all circling in a chaotic orbit and breaking up into smaller pieces. And they realized that over time what's going to happen is with smaller and smaller pieces, these are going to begin to rain down on the Earth and lead to a 5,000-year period where the Earth would become basically sterilized. Massive release of heat with these chunks of the moon dropping in. And how mankind dealt with that impending catastrophe and aimed to propagate the human species in various fascinating ways. And what I loved about the book was it was both meticulously grounded in correct scientific principles, but it also dealt with all of the politics and ego and human conflicts that occur, in good times and in crisis. I thought it was a brilliant book, and almost 1,000 pages.
Wow.
Yeah.
I want to know more about you. I mean, it's like we know about this persona that is this MD, PhD, that is genius, Harvard and Stanford, graduate, but whatever it is that gives you incredible satisfaction.
One thing that inspires me is my work, but that's not the only thing that inspires me. We've talked about Benji and my family, and reading non-medical books. I like biking. I like yoga. I like dancing, although not exactly the same kind.
What kind of dancing?
I'm rediscovering my love of international folk dancing. And I don't mean
rediscovering.
Square. Yeah, I did that for many years. In fact, I taught and I
Anything
performed.
You want to show us today?
No, actually,
okay,
nothing.
I was just kidding.
Nothing I'd like to. But if you'd like to.
I can't international folk dance, but I'm inspired by you.
All right, but I had gotten really out of that for many, many years, and just went for the first time just last week, and had a wonderful time remembering, these Bulgarian, Greek, and Israeli and Arabic folk dances that I'd done in my teens and 20s. And,
how did you get involved in that in your teens?
I don't remember exactly what got me into it, but I really felt like I liked the music. I played piano. I was a bit of a musician. I liked to dance. And my wife is more of a, she likes more of the like swing, Lindy Hop, salsa, tango.
Wow. So do you go out dancing for fun, the two of you?
Not as much as we should, but we're going to try to find a middle ground where we both like to dance, and just aim to find. And travel, and also food is another thing that, outside of my research, my wife and I have a strong enjoyment of, cooking and eating well. And we had a wonderful dinner last night. I call it a dinner in 3D. We had David Ludwig.
Oh, goodness.
David
and I
Perlmutter,
love to have been a fly on the wall there.
David Ludwig, David Perlmutter, and Dave Asprey, along with each of our respective wives, who, each of whom were, each of these three women are just amazing in their own rights, with their interests, both their support of their husbands' careers, but their interest in their careers on their own.
Okay, we need to talk about the menu. We need to talk about, I don't need to know where you ate. I need to know what everybody ate.
I'll tell you, I will go into complete detail.
Okay, start with yourself.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I remember what everybody ate, but I do remember, it was a long dinner. Probably we were there for, imagine, 3 hours, and we really splurged on some wines. I'm trying to not drink too much alcohol. It really doesn't. It affects my sleep. But I decided I'll suffer, and we had some really beautiful wines because Dave Perlmutter's wife lived in France, and whereas my wife Dawn studied cooking, cuisine in France, she studied enology and wine. So she was a wine expert. She picked out the best. We had 2 bottles, but among the 6 of us, which is still pretty modest. But the first bottle was a spectacular Pinot grown on a biodynamic farm, and it was really an exceptional wine. You just wanted to. We didn't even want to taste it because it smelled so wonderful. We didn't want to rush that experience. We just sat around, just savoring the bouquet. And then I think we had a range of many different vegetables, wonderful vegetables, and there was various assortments of fish, lobster, and lamb chops moving around the table, and then
no bread basket, I presume.
No bread basket. I don't think. I think most of the people didn't eat bread,
right.
And then nobody ate dessert. We just had. It's not that we had any issues having dessert, but we were just so full and so happy at the end of that meal. It was a really good conversation, and.
What a wonderful dinner that must have been.
Yeah, it was a great dinner.
So talk about your baby here, Always Hungry.
Yeah.
New York Times #1 bestseller.
Yes, well.
How long did it take you to write?
All my life. Well, actually, the actual writing of it is 9 months or so. Right. But these are ideas that have been germinating in me for many years. And I'd written another book, and remember when I wrote my first book, which is called Ending the Food Fight, Guide Your Child to a Healthy Weight in a Fast Food, Junk Food World. It was really that I really wanted to write that book based on my experience with pediatrics and families. Somebody had told me writing a book will be 10 times harder than you thought. And in my case, I think that was an underestimate by about tenfold. it was an enormous amount of work writing. In some ways, the second book was easier to write because I knew what I was getting into. And I decided to write this myself rather than with a writer because, to me, how one speaks and how one uses words, just even the use of the words is part of the process of helping people to get excited, to discover that fascination with the underlying principles in the body, so that they can then find their own internal wisdom. There's a lot of guidance in the book.
You've had a lot of accolades on this book.
Thank you. The first part of the book is the science, and the second part is a 3-phase program to help people put the principles into effect. The idea is that we're going to, overeating doesn't make you fat, not over the long term. That sounds a little surprising, but that something has triggered our fat cells to hoard too many calories. So they take in too many calories, there's actually too few for the rest of the body. That's why we get hungry. That's why our metabolism slows down. That's why we go into starvation mode. And if you simply eat less and move more like you're told to do, you actually make that worse. So the problem is to address the other side of the energy balance equation, not focus on how much we're eating, but focus on eating in a way to calm down the fat cells. And when they calm down, they open up, the calories flood back into the body, then you're naturally less hungry.
It's very simple. It's very simple.
Well, it's a simple principle, but
right.
it kind of flies in the face with the conventional mindset. But what we see in the testimonials that we have in our community, we have a Facebook community called the Official Always Hungry Book Community, approaching 8,000 people who are following the meal plan. It's free and non-commercial, supporting each other. One of the common testimonials we get there is that before people actually lose any weight, they're really shocked at how their cravings for sugar or processed carbohydrates turn off. That's the point. When you've solved the underlying metabolic problem, then your brain is on your side. And so the point is, once you've gotten the science, get into the program. We have recipes, meal plans. My wife, Dawn, was in charge of designing those. But then we ultimately want people to be able to manage this themselves for life. And I think that's where I wanted to have a direct relationship with the reader. And the only way I could do that was writing the book myself, not having somebody trying to channel me.
Well, best of luck with this.
Thank
I
you.
will absolutely read it.
I will absolutely.
And then you'll have 8,001 Facebook followers.
I'll
Please.
absolutely autograph.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Let's bring Dawn in.
Please.
Okay.
We're so thrilled that you're here, Dawn. It was such a nice surprise to hear that you were actually in the building, and we had to have you.
Thank you. Thank
So
you.
thank you for making the time and coming to join us. So first of all, I need to know, and I know that this may be breaching some things that you don't want to talk about, but how did you first meet?
Oh, that's an easy one. We were actually at a conference, a food conference, and I was a cooking teacher, and he was the keynote speaker. And we came to the conference. It was a week in the middle of Pulteney, Vermont, in the middle of nowhere. And we came to the conference. As we both walked in, we both went to the little trade show tables, and there was a sea vegetable table. And we both just congregated at the sea vegetable table somehow.
I looked up and I saw this very nice-looking foodie, and I just did my best to try to come up with something to say that wouldn't embarrass myself. I guess
How'd that work for you?
I guess it worked.
You did well. I think we went over to the cafe and
Show
had
me the
tea.
wedding ring.
Yep.
How many years?
That's how
11
it
years. Oh, we've been married 9 years. We've been
Nine-
together 11
9 and a half.
years.
Yeah.
That's so nice.
And we just started working together really more consciously in the past couple of years with the book. But before that, we
How
didn't.
did that come about?
Well, when David first started writing the book, our son was maybe 6, and so I wasn't really thinking as much in terms of writing a book. It was really his thing. And as we started looking at recipes and dietitian plans, because more goes into writing a recipe here, because you have to have the macronutrients and you have to have the dietitian program and the culinary side. And he was doing so much work with the writing. He said, "Honey, could you oversee that part and work with them. And as they started sending things in, I just got involved in it. And I realized it was really the culmination of my career as a chef.
An educator.
And as a teacher and educator, and it all just came together and seemed like every stage of my career was being used.
Wow.
And I think we contracted for 25 recipes, and I ended up cutting it down to 82, something like that in there, and with all vegetarian options and dairy-free options. And so the depth of it got much bigger when I stepped in, and it was a fantastic project. We found that we worked really well together.
And you have another project.
Yes, so now I'm writing the follow-up cookbook.
Oh, wonderful.
And so
When
I've
is that
spent...
expected out?
It's expected to be released January 2018. So it's a lot of work that goes into it. I test my own recipes. I develop
on your
my
family
own.
Or on
On my
whoever?
family and on. I'm really pretty meticulous
Yes,
about
we're
that.
willing to suffer.
Yeah, sure.
They are. Yeah, there are a few bombs, but not very many.
If you have a delivery meal plan, then
Right. If you're in the
I'd
Boston
even willing to
area,
move to Boston.
there you go. And then I send my recipes out to a network around the country because I want to see what food accessibility is, what kind of brands people can access, if they can get the ingredients. I don't want them to be so far-fetched that they can't get them, and make sure it appeals to a wide range. So it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun, a lot of creative expression going on there.
So what initially inspired you to get interested in studying nutrition?
Well, I think I've always been a foodie, and the nutrition came when I was in my 20s, and I had all kinds of health problems, but nothing that was major. I had a lot of little things wrong, and allergies and tension neck aches and backaches and hypoglycemia and irritable bowel syndrome,
Chronic
bronchitis. Oh yeah, chronic lung problems, respiratory problems. But they were just little things that. So I lived on ibuprofen and ran 180 miles an hour and didn't think twice about it.
Took a lot of medicines.
I took a lot of medicines, allergy medicines and pain relievers, and I was having cortisone shots in my elbow because I had tendonitis and chronic neck and back pain. I was in my 20s.
Wow.
Yeah, chronic neck and back pain. But I was successful. I worked out. But I didn't really think twice about it. And I always loved food, and so I went to these cooking classes and started learning about food. And the things this woman said made a lot of sense. And so I kept going and I kept studying, and I started changing my diet based on things that she would recommend. And then I got really interested because I saw some incredible shifts in the way I felt. And then I really dove in and started documenting. I really relate to Dave Asprey and his biohacking idea. Because that's kind of what I did. I wrote down everything, and this teacher would go every 3 months and she would show me patterns. Did you notice when you were eating this, these kind of patterns happen within a few days? And so that awareness of my body and learning to listen really became important. I did that for about 2 years, and it changed everything. It changed everything. And after about 2 years, I got mad, and I thought, I'm an educated person. I love food. Why did I never learn this before? And so I determined that I was going to help teach other people and help empower them to be able to live healthy lives. And so I ended up quitting my corporate job. I bought the culinary school where I trained. I started training with people all over the world, and then ended up building a chef training program to train chefs in natural foods and specialty diets, food allergies, 20 years ago, before it was really a thing, and spent the next 15 years training chefs so that people would have access to natural foods. I'm
thinking that you two were put on this planet to be married to each other.
Yes.
This is unbelievable. So that first coffee
after you first met at the sea vegetable
No, she wasn't
table.
drinking coffee.
We were drinking tea.
The first, okay. I mean, it must have been quite a conversation. I could only imagine what that first.
Well, I wasn't really
was
looking
like.
for.
Okay.
I was getting out of a relationship. I wasn't really looking. I resisted a little bit, but it didn't. It didn't take long.
Not so much.
It didn't take long to know. And the funny thing is, we're such different people.
In what way?
We're just such different people.
In what way?
Okay. Just like,
He's just like the Western
let's do the-
scientist, right? He's like the
Right.
Western scientist.
Right.
He's
Where did
very
you grow up?
data oriented, and I kind of like move from my heart.
Right.
And when the two get put together, it really works for us. And I think it really helps. I think we both have enough compassion and care. We really care about people and our readers. That's what guides us. And I think that common purpose and those common values to really make a difference in the world is what brings us together and helps us bring information freely and lovingly to our community.
nicely said.
So let's talk about home life.
Home life,
Home
yes.
life. So what is your typical meal plan for the week for
Right.
the Ludwig family?
Well, right now I'm developing a cookbook, so whatever I'm testing for the day tends to come up in our meal plan. But we have breakfast together every morning with our son, and we have dinner together every night. David works long hours, but he's home for dinner every night.
So important.
And
So David, what's your favorite meal that Dawn makes for dinner?
That kind of reminds me of a joke. Like, your mother gives you two ties.
I know the story, but what's wrong with the other tie?
You wear one
I
of
know.
them, and she says you don't like the other. How do I choose a single meal? There's just so many wonderful meals. That,
You're so politically correct. It's unbelievable.
well, it's not political correct. It's just
Right.
actually correct. But
You don't have a favorite?
We have just many favorites, but we are not strictly vegetarian. Dawn's actually for a while. She does better, really, with less protein,
More plant-based.
plant-based eating. But we have a moderate approach. So we'll have, several nights a week we'll have fish. Sometimes I'll chicken. We eat some vegetarian, completely vegan meals, like with tofu or tempeh. One of the dishes that was very popular in our book, in the first book, was a shepherd's pie reinvented. So instead of the traditional meat and potatoes on top, the top white portion was cauliflower and millet, which really gets this creamy potato-like flavor, but it's lower glycemic load. And the meat was crumbled tempeh, which if you fry the right way and lots of olive oil, takes on this just very savory, gives you the umami. And so that's a great plant-based meal, but that shows ways that vegetarians can increase their protein and fat intake without overdoing the fast-acting carbohydrates.
And an interesting story about this particular recipe, it was developed as an original vegan recipe, and then I converted it to a beef recipe for the book. But originally I do a lot of...
So we have two options.
We have two options.
We have the beef option, but we also have the tempeh.
The tempeh option.
Yeah.
But what happened was usually I would do a millet cauliflower topping like he described. And as we were putting the numbers into the dietary guidelines, I needed a little more protein. I needed a little something in there. And David is actually a really good cook. He's really handy in the kitchen.
Oh, he left that part out.
He's really good, and some of these recipes are actually his recipes. And so we're playing with the dietary numbers, and we need a little protein. And so David says he's like a walking dietitian program.
Fun.
Yes, he can eat something and tell you if it needs more fat or more protein. And so he's very helpful that way. So he said, put white beans in the topping instead of millet, and it was magic.
Wow.
It was magic. And this topping...
Oh, it's white beans. Yeah, it's not millet.
It's not millet. It's white beans. And that's one of the things we get from our Facebook group often. that people will make just that topping and serve it as a mashed potato and trick their family. That creaminess of the white beans just stands out.
Yeah, and the beans, you just give you that little extra bit of protein.
That's right. That's right.
So, Dawn, obviously you have built quite a career for yourself. Where do you see this taking you personally and professionally?
Well, I think my interest has been from the beginning making a difference in people's health. And so writing this book, like I said, was kind of this culmination of all of the things I've learned in my career. And I want to continue to take that forward with the new cookbook coming out. I do a lot of work on our Facebook group, working with people, and my passion really is to help people figure out who they are and love themselves without the shame and the blame and the stigma that goes along with weight and food and diet, and help them find more what we call NSVs, non-scale victories, and really celebrate those little things. On our Facebook group, my rule number 1 is be gentle on yourself and others. So often people come into these diets and they want to change their family and change their friends and I really help people to find the place that's gentle if they go off plan a little bit, to come back and
be tolerant of others who may not be exactly
where they are, and tolerant of themselves too. And so 5 years down the road, I want to continue to do this, and I also want to continue to help people who might not have thought about vegetables or plant-based foods to try the recipes. I want my recipes to be dishes that people eat and they say, wow, I never thought I liked tofu. I never thought I liked eggplant. And it happens all the time in our group. So I want to do more of that. I want to help change people's lives and their relationships with themselves and food.
Yeah, Dawn is really an agent of change in really a positive way. That she comes at this with her heart, and people understand that, people feel that, and when she does blend that emotional caring and empathy with a deep intuitive understanding of food and health, well, that's a real powerful healing combination.
Mm-hmm. And then combine that with the hard Western science. And that's why we work as such a great team, because I get to translate his science into this juicy, yummy passion for food and recipes.
We worked so well as a team because I was so good looking.
That too, it helps.
I think we're going to end it there. You guys are wonderful, and I'm so honored to have had this opportunity to sit with both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.